back, and it's a delight to be able to say we're joined by a man that I've come to regard not only as a very good friend and very close colleague, but also as one of our country's preeminent experts on the enemy within challenge we're facing to the homeland security of the United States. His name is Kyle Shideler. He is in charge of the project on Homeland Security of the Center for Security Policy. He does a superb job with a small but very able team to try to keep both elected officials and law enforcement personnel and others in the media and the public at large throughout our country aware of the various challenges that we're facing and the dangers they represent to our constitutional republic. Uh, Kyle has been active in particular on various threats involving violence against our country, and we want to talk about one of them, which manifested itself in a shooting in Uvalde, Texas last week. It's gotten a tremendous amount of attention, understandably, because of the terrible loss of children's lives and a few adults as well. Um, but to make sense of both what happened and what is now being said about it and trying to be done in response to it, I'm really glad to have Kyle with us for an extended conversation. It's good to have you back, Kyle. Welcome once again to
Thanks for
Security
having me,
America.
Frank. It's always a pleasure.
Good. Let me talk to you about, first of all, what we know about what went down in Uvalde. You've written an important piece about it. Remind us where people can find it and the sort of general thrust of the article.
Sure. So I wrote a piece for American Greatness about the real ambivalence that I think Americans have when it comes to the question of what kind of policing they actually want. When we have an incident like we had in Uvalde, Texas, we hear very clearly from Americans that they want law enforcement officers who are aggressive, who are going to go into unknown situations and take out the bad guy when that's what's called for. And with an active shooter in a school like we had in Uvalde, that is absolutely the doctrine that is promoted for police to do. And my personal opinion is that is the right decision. But what
Go
you are
in,
at,
and the operative word I think is right away, basically,
correct.
in order to
Hmm.
try to spare the carnage that we saw in this case.
Right. They call it an immediate rapid deployment. And the first officer on the scene should immediately move in and begin hunting the suspect or suspects inside the place where the active shooting is taking place. But I think what people don't talk about very much is the kind of person that is required to do that. Not just the training, which is insufficient. Law enforcement officers get some training on this, but they don't get everyday, constant training of the kind that you would want if you were suddenly faced with that situation.
Mhm.
And the reality is that the other 364 days of the year, that's not what police officers do. And so they are trained on and spend the vast majority of their time doing things which have nothing to do with that. And then they are suddenly faced with a situation where, if it were to occur for one of our military members overseas in combat, they would very likely be put up for a Medal of Honor because you're talking about charging a potentially barricaded suspect with an automatic weapon in a situation in which you have no intelligence. I mean, this is truly something that is done by heroes.
Right.
And to expect that all 700,000 law enforcement officers in the United States are going to have the personal mettle and virtue that is required to do that is just unlikely. And it's
Yes.
even more unlikely given the fact that we have spent the last several years really having a war on policing in this country,
Right.
with politicians who have deliberately pushed policies that undermine law enforcement at every turn, that seek to disarm them, to eliminate their capabilities, and ultimately to abolish or defund them.
Yes. So, Kyle, when you look at this circumstance in which you had a number of law enforcement personnel, it wasn't just the first guy on the spot, but there were a number of them positioned outside of the school. And they were awaiting the people who have the kind of tactical training, as well as, let's face it, the personal mettle, as you call it, to charge into these circumstances, but would have done it with more body armor, would have done it with more firepower, would have done it with numbers of people. Was there something wrong with the execution that evolved? Maybe not so much on the part of the first individual responding officer, but when that larger cohort was present, that argued for action, notwithstanding the absence of that SWAT team.
I think it clearly did. It seems, based on what we know now, that there was confusion about what exactly the scene was. It was clearly initially an active shooter scene, but the incident commander appears to have believed that the incident shifted to a barricaded suspect, which is to say that the active killing had stopped and the suspect was pinned in a classroom, unable to escape, and then had to be dealt with. Now, it appears that he may have been wrong about that, but it would not be surprising if he had been right about that, that the decision to wait and bring in people with the proper equipment and training to deal with it. But he was wrong about that, it appears. We know that from 911 calls made from inside the classroom and other things. But, this is one of the things that happens with a very fast moving scene where things are changing very quickly. And sometimes people make the wrong call, and that
Yeah.
may be what happened here.
Well, I guess that's to the point, really, for a lot of the critics. It wasn't such a fast moving scene after all. Maybe that decision was made rapidly under circumstances that argued for making it. But then, what, an hour or the better part of one passed until that, I guess it was Border Patrol tactical unit was able to finally get in place. If I got that scenario and timeline roughly right, as best we can establish it now, and would you say that the failure to reconsider, based in part on those 9/11 calls, the decision made by the guy on the scene, the commanding officer on the scene, should have taken place at some point well before the moment when they finally broke the door down and took him out?
Well, that's one of the things that needs to be studied, Frank. How was information flowing to the incident commander? What did he know? What didn't he know? How was he relaying his messages? What was being heard? What wasn't being heard? And if there was a problem with that incident command, which there may have been, I think that's where we're going to realize the problem lied in understanding what was going on and how to respond to it. It now appears that the Uvalde police have stepped back their cooperation with the Texas Department of Public Safety. So it may put up some barriers to properly understanding what happened in that incident. I think it's very important we do get to the bottom of how exactly that incident went down, but also maintain some level of understanding that an incident like this, we were talking about how many casualties we could reduce. We weren't, preventing it from happening, I think, was probably outside the realm of possibility. When you have an incident like this, you're looking to reduce the number of casualties you take
Right.
As much as possible.
But again, that argued for intervention earlier. I think it's fair to say.
And that is
We
the
had
doctrine. That is the doctrine, and I think it is the right doctrine.
right, and we had the advantage of hindsight, of course, and second guessing the decisions that are made in the heat of, well, battle, effectively. And I think your point is extremely well taken, Kyle. That these are circumstances that in war would be regarded as requiring real heroism. Um, Typically, I think in the law enforcement environment, we simply think it's expected of people and they're just supposed to do it and get the job done. But it does take very special individuals trained in a whole host of skill sets, it's needless to say. And I appreciate both your critical analysis of what happened and your sympathy for the people who had to make those tough decisions, as well as the people, of course, who perished in the course of all of this. Kyle, I wanted you to hold on. We're going to come back and talk more about what the left is now doing in the wake of this incident and what it'll mean for all of us. Straight ahead.